Hey everybody, it's a marathon day. Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us for the third hour of our ESG Summit. We're calling this one The Road to Zero-Emission Trucks, and the focus is on charging infrastructure. We're going to be taking a look at the future of electric trucks and the infrastructure needed to support them now that most manufacturers have committed to EV technology. This is a first in a three-part series. So this is part 3 of today, but this is going to start an ongoing conversation at The Hill on the subject of EV transformation in the trucking sector. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Environmental Defense Fund, for supporting today's event. The transportation sector is the largest and fastest growing source of climate pollution in the United States. Trucks account for over a quarter of on-road transportation greenhouse gas emissions and are a major source of health-harming air pollution. Despite eventual long-term savings, the infrastructure cost required to transition to electric trucks is high. Today, we're going to dive into the EV charging infrastructure supply chain, federal initiatives for large-scale charging installations, and health and equity concerns when it comes to the impact of trucks on frontline communities. Before we bring on our fantastic lineup of speakers, a few housekeeping notes. As always, you can tweet us at The Hill Events, and today it's hashtag The Hill Trucks. Or excuse me, The Hill E-Trucks, The Hill E-Trucks. The Hill E-Trucks. We're going to broadcast live, and we'll take your questions throughout the program. As with any live stream, if it all goes wonky, just push refresh, and it will get better. We're kicking off with the program right now with Congressman Yvette Clarke from New York. She chairs the Homeland Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation Subcommittee. Representative Clarke has introduced the Electric Vehicles for Underserved Communities Act in the House, which tasked the Department of Energy with creating 200,000 electric vehicle charging stations in underserved communities by 2030. I had a chance to speak with her earlier today. Take a listen. Representative Clarke, it's so great to see you again. Thank you for joining us today. Every time I kind of get into a new track, excuse the pun, on a new issue like, electric trucks, you're attached to infrastructure and science and technology. So today we're talking about the real prospect of zero-emission trucks in the future. What are the missing pieces that need to be in our awareness as we think about what it will take to create an inclusive and successful program on transitioning our trucks to zero emissions?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back with you again, Steve. And, I think that, first of all, we have to have an infrastructure in where trucks, vehicles are able to easily access their source of energy. And so I thought it was really, really important for us to establish, particularly in underserved communities, an electrical vehicle charging station infrastructure. I have a bill, which is HR 1221, and this legislation really dedicates itself to the build out of over 200,000 charging stations in underserved communities. And I thought it was critical because those are the communities that have suffered the most from vehicle emissions and pollutants in our air, and have had the worst disparities in healthcare. And in addition to that, when you're living in densely populated communities, trucks are another source of emissions, diesel trucks in particular. And so I knew that it was important, given, our commerce in the United States and the amount of truck travel that it takes to deliver goods and services across our nation, that we convert our fleets. In particular, we're hearing from the private sector, companies like Amazon already making those commitments, U.S. Postal Service making those commitments, because those trucks have really been a source of huge emissions, again, the CO2 in our communities. I also have a piece of legislation that deals with freezer trucks. People don't recognize that those are probably some of the most highly emitting vehicles on the road. And they sit and they idle, and they're also making sure that those provisions we need that have to stay frozen are also there. That takes another source of energy. So my bill, the Freezer Truck Act, would make that conversion so that, again, we are getting to a zero emission society. And that's HR 1335.
Representative Clarke, is there a danger lurking out there in the trucking sector? And I'm going to try to, frame this right when I may make a mistake. But, on one hand, we're talking about building out hundreds of thousands of charging stations, with an emphasis on communities of color and underserved communities, who are also the backbone of that workforce. So when you look at the workforce that are there, so not only victims of emissions, but they're also very much a part of that labor workforce. But I got to tell you, next week I might be doing a program on the coming automation of trucks. So we may see a displacement of those very employees we're trying to protect and save. And I'm wondering if there's any convergence opportunity there where we can both kind of come up with a zero emission strategy, but we're also not leaving people behind in the process, as we develop other developments in the scientific application of autonomous driving to the trucking industry.
Yeah, I think that folks forget that, that unleashes a whole new set of employment opportunities. While autonomous vehicles are self-driving, as indicated by the name, there are individuals that have to make sure that fleet is kept up to par, is maintained, that the infrastructure on which it will operate, the sensors and the roads and the things of that nature need to be maintained. And, we have to be vigilant around the use of these vehicles. That's going to take human capital to maintain and to constantly put vehicles in service, out of service. There's so many new opportunities that come about as we sort of revolutionize the environment around us. It's an ecosystem that's going to require human engagement, both for the delivery of our goods and products, but also the maintenance of the infrastructure that will be built out around us and building out that infrastructure. So we're all concerned. Of course, there are heart palpitations around getting rid of the old and bringing in the new. But with that comes a lot of opportunity. And I'm looking forward to those opportunities being equitably given out and distributed throughout our civil society in those communities that have been densely populated, for those workers who are within the sort of delivery and service industries. They will have new opportunities to utilize those skills and to transfer them into other endeavors.
How big a lift is this? Are things moving in that direction? I guess I have to admit, surprised that when it came to personal automobile charging stations, we've seen the deployment of that much faster than I would have thought possible. So there are tax credits, state and local governments got on board. And it kind of moved forward. So when it comes to sort of the elements and building blocks you need to make this a reality, does the Biden infrastructure bill include it? Do you find enthusiasm from the trucking industry? Is it a light lift or a heavy lift to accomplish this?
I think politically it's a somewhat heavy lift, but I think with respect to industry and the private sector, they're already there. And so it's really a matter of putting the pieces together, incentivizing the ability to expedite this process. But, the technology already exists. The will among a number of members of Congress is there. Of course, the Biden-Harris administration has indicated that, where we need to move in this direction swiftly, because our planet, our communities, our environment needs us to take these bold steps in order to have a fighting chance against climate change. And in addition to that, we have the technological know-how we've got to bring our nation into the 21st century and be global leaders in this space. We have to remember where this is a competitive environment, so that there are other nations around the world, namely China, that has already begun and has for some time electrifying their environment, putting up high-speed rail. And we're a bit behind in the United States. And I think that coming to that realization and understanding that industry is already there, we can do this and do it expeditiously over the next, decade. And so I'm looking forward to it. And I know that many people who I represent in my district are looking forward to it. And it will unleash a new industrial age in the United States that creates a healthier environment for our people to thrive in.
Let me just ask you a final question. I want to remind our audience that Yvette Clarke is the chair of the Homeland Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection and Innovation Subcommittee. That's a long way of saying that she's about building trust and building opportunity, right? So you got to have trust and faith and security. You also have to have a sense that through innovation, we can solve some of our problems. I want to ask you an off-the-grid question because it's really on my mind. This is a time where we're discussing race and difference and underserved communities and systematic racism. Systemic racism in this country. We've had, we still haven't seen the kinds of steps after George Floyd's murder that a lot of people had hoped. We're making progress here and there, I suppose. But fundamentally, I just want to know in 5 years, will we be able to look back at this time and say, this underserved community that you've been focused on and talking about is finally going to have greater trust and faith that it is part of this country as well, and that there is mutual recognition, mutual empathy. And I know it's a big question, but I just think about it's so important right now to get it right. And I'm wondering if you see the pieces coming into place where we are doing that.
Steve, I'm an eternal optimist, and I have to say that I do. Will it happen tomorrow? Will it happen next year? Who knows? But change is always present with the human, experiment of democracy and freedom exists. And I think people are far more attuned to these inequities, these racial divides that have been, a fault line in our civil society. There's a generation coming up that's very in tune. There's a generation that is unfortunately, aging out. That held beliefs that are not the beliefs of those who are much younger, much more engaged with one another. And so I'm very hopeful. When I looked at the sort of protest movement of last summer, the summer before last summer, I saw an intergenerational dynamic. A multiracial, multi-religious dynamic to it. And it was refreshing. It was unfortunate that it came out of the pain and anguish of watching someone get murdered. And it was unfortunate that it happened in the midst of a global pandemic. But to see that type of animated engagement of the American people in the very question that you've asked indicates to me that it struck a chord with a significant part of our population that are not willing to let it go, that are not willing to live under conditions that subordinate the humanity of others. And so I'm very optimistic that, the components are in place for us to build out a civil society, a post COVID-19 society that is much more mindful and engaged in involving as many different people, if you will, in the strides of our civil society. And I'm really excited about that.
I love your optimism, and so I will. For this, I'm usually a cynic, but I will buy into your optimism and hope you're right. Representative Yvette Clarke, who's chair of the Homeland Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection Innovation Subcommittee. She's on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, but most importantly, she's going to be responsible for your EV charging stations all over the country with her Electric Vehicles for Underserved Communities Act. It's such a pleasure to have you on today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me once again. Good to be with you, Steve. Stay safe, stay healthy.